3 years on from the day a young man set himself on fire in a remote town in Tunisia, an act that led to revolt and uprisings against governments across the region. So how close has Tunisia come to achieving the transition from dictator to democracy? And have the revolutions it inspired improved life for those who rose up or made it worse? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the programme. I'm Sue Turton. It began as one man's act of desperation. A 26-year-old street vendor named Mohamed Bouazizi set himself on fire in the Tunisian town of Sidi Bouzid. He was in debt and struggling to make a living. His death unleashed a wave of protest against political repression and economic hardship in the North African country. And it inspired a revolt that spread across much of the Arab world. 3 years on, protesters in the impoverished town where it all began have been taking part in what they're calling a day of rage. They say their lives haven't improved since President Zine El Abidine Ben Ali was forced out of office. Since then, Tunisia has been gripped by political paralysis. But a new deal announced at the weekend aims to put in place an independent caretaker government to supervise new elections next year. It was a decision welcomed by the leader of the Islamic Ennahda party.
God made of this day a day of democracy's victory in Tunisia, a victory of dialogue over confrontation, a victory of dialogue over violence.
But others aren't so convinced.
The major issue that triggered the revolt was unemployment. The unemployed hope that they can have more opportunities. But till now, nothing has changed. The politicians are all fighting for power and do not listen to the people's voice.
The politicians have done nothing to improve Tunisia's economy. The economic situation is poor. It is very hard to find jobs. There are many poor people. There's little change, just like when Ben Ali was ruling the country.
So is progress being made in Tunisia? And is it just a matter of time before countries involved in the Arab Spring realise real change? Plenty to discuss with my guests. In Tunis, Amine Ghali, Programme Director at the Kawakibi Democracy Transition Center. Here in Doha, Larbi Sadiki, a specialist in Arab democratisation, revolutions and transitions at Qatar University. And also joining us from the Tunisian capital is Youssef Cherif, a well-known Tunisian blogger. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining me. Youssef Cherif, if I can start with you, how does Tunisia today compare to Tunisia before the revolution, 3 years ago?
Shortly, it's a free country with a very bad economy and not so well doing security situation. But at least it's a free country and heading towards democracy.
Amine Ghali, would you agree? Heading towards democracy, moving towards democratic principles?
Absolutely, I fully agree that Tunisia is now indeed a free country, a country that enjoys a lot of freedom at least compared to the Tunisia before the revolution and compared to countries of the Arab region. But we are not into a democratic country. We are not there yet, but we are trying our best to move toward the right direction.
Would you say the country today is unrecognisable from 3 years ago? Has it really changed that much?
No, I won't say that much, but I would say that the country is almost the same streets, same people, but we have a new dynamic at the political level, new dynamic at the social level, and we are waiting for a new dynamic at the economic level, which is waiting a little, which is being delayed somehow during this last year or so.
Larbi Sadiki, quite optimistic, those two guests, but basically saying, are you optimistic about the state of Tunisia now compared to how it was 3 years ago too?
I think the surroundings are pessimistic, but one has to maintain a optimistic demeanor. Definitely it is a country in revolution and in transition. And the main thing is that transition does not kill revolution and revolution does not kill transition. But if you think like transition as an end game, then really you miss on the process. So it is really a learning process. So the learning curve is how to rebuild a Tunisia that can actually yeah, I guess really engage in self-regeneration. That is really important. So I agree with what's been said, but of course, some people are more equal than others. So if you are in Sidi Bouzid today and you look at Tunis, sort of northwards, you see privilege, you see opportunity. If you're in Gafsa, Sidi Bouzid, Kasserine, etc., those are basically the have-nots, the marginals, where it all began. And what's being done really is that really going to, I guess, really prevent people, from protesting again and maybe even unhinging the existing system that is being built.
Let's just put this into context of the last 3 years, reminding ourselves of how events unfolded in Tunisia. Starting on that day in 2010, December the 17th, when Mohamed Bouazizi set himself on fire, setting off riots under state of emergency. A matter of weeks later, longtime leader Zine El Abidine Ben Ali stepped down and left the country. In October 2011, the Islamic Ennahda party won the most seats in Tunisia's first free election. 2012 saw more protests, but worse was to come. In February this year, opposition leader Chokri Belaid was assassinated, and a second opposition figure, Mohamed Rahmi, was shot dead in July. The worsening political crisis was eased on Friday when rival parties agreed on a new prime minister to form a new independent caretaker government, with elections due to take place next year. Larbi Sadiki, is much of what we're seeing in Tunisia, compared to other Arab countries, a lot to do with how you deal with the previous regime? I'm thinking about Libya's political isolation law, where previous members of the state were banned from being involved in the new Libya, if you like. I know the Ennahda party had shelved this immunisation of the revolution law, not wanting to go down that road. Do you think that maybe points to why Tunisia is seen as being a little bit more successful, because they are embracing many of the old as well as the new?
Definitely, it's a hybrid place. I think that is really the beauty of Tunisia, that it is really a place of diversity. And I think really no one actually should really be patronizing and take it upon themselves to defend the revolution, because really the revolution cannot be defended by institutions, especially when it emerged bottom up. Of course, it's controversial to introduce laws to exclude people at a time really when you want actually to go towards some kind of consensus building, capacity building, because no one actually under the ancien regime, the old regime, either in Libya, Egypt or Tunisia, were fully responsible for their actions. So from that perspective, definitely I'm really optimistic about Tunisia. Tunisia still really has got lots going for it. The main thing is consensus. The name of the game is consensus. And I think also really the specificity of an Islamist movement that is capable of making concessions, and also the workshop that has been underway also showed the ability of civil society and political parties to learn to actually grasp the political moment and engage with it. Everyone is entitled to make mistakes. Tunisians are like everyone else in Libya, Egypt, they make mistakes, but I think they always have got some kind of way of I guess really recovering. So it's fluid, but the latitude always to engage in self-correction, I think, is creative politically for the Tunisians.
Amine Ghali, is there a risk really of being inclusive? I really slightly felt like Tunisia came back from the brink earlier this year. The inclusivity that you do carry on with the old regime in some respects, is there a risk there as you move forwards?
Well, as in many transitions, as in many experiences throughout the world, we see that we always have risk for transition. The risk doesn't come only from the old regime. Yes, it is present in Tunisia, but the risk comes from the excluded. The risk comes even from people in power. Your guest talked right now for this kind of approach of consensus, of inclusiveness, but this has not been the approach adopted from, let's say, the revolution till now. It has been adopted in the early months of the revolution. Then we saw one party winning the election and trying to go through majority-minority rule. And it looks like majority-minority rule does not work much during transition period. the safeguard or the safety net for these kind of risks is to go through consensus, through dialogue, through exchange. We have seen major events in Tunisia, major negative events that almost brought the transition to a standstill or even to a collapse. But hopefully each time we come to the edge and then we manage to overpass it or overcome it. Now, Saturday, the politicians decided on a new phase of transition, an independent and neutral government. Let's see if this is one of the ways that should be adopted to manage this transition period, to manage, successfully this transition and create some form of a defense from the risk you are talking about.
Youssef Cherif, we're just looking at pictures from the streets from August. There's sort of the voice of the people not happy with the way things were this summer coming out. How much do you think that voice really pushed Tunisia almost back on an even keel to move forwards? How much do you think that it was reliant on the people who've now got themselves a voice to keep making it be heard?
Of course, a lot of people are not happy today, especially because of the economy and because of the security situation. I think, but the fact that they are demonstrating outside means that already something changed because it was not possible before. But of course, people are demonstrating, and I think that that's what pushed these governments, this government and the one before, and the two ones before, to resign. Is that now at least the voice of the street is heard. So with all the negative sides that street demonstrations have, I think the positive side is that at least it's people are represented in the government, if I understood well your question.
The World Bank is quite negative about economic growth in Tunisia. Do you think that is the key, that if unemployment doesn't improve, that if the economy doesn't start to lift, then people are just not going to be happy with the situation?
Exactly, and again, it's, I would say, economy and security, and these were the two things that the former regime, the Ben Ali regime, was strong with. So if now people see that the two things that were good before the revolution are bad now, of course they will be totally disappointed with any regime that will come now and with the revolution itself. So I think the two main priorities for any government to come is to reform the economy and find a way to make it work better and to reform the security situation. But of course, if there is enough money and enough cash circulating, if there is less unemployment, I think the security situation will more or less follow the path. So yes, I think the two main reforms to come are in economy and security. If not, we're heading towards some really a gloomy future.
Amine Ghali, how does the army fit in Tunisia's both past and present? We know that they weren't as strong, the military was not as strong in Tunisia as, say, it was in Egypt and in Libya, for example. Is that one of the reasons that Tunisia was able to move forwards in the way it did, because the military didn't have such a sort of overriding control over the people in Tunisia?
For sure, Tunisia has never been a military state like the neighboring countries. You named Libya and Egypt, but also other neighboring countries. Tunisia has been a police state. The police has been the powerful institution in the country, the powerful institution in the context of, at the institutional level, but also a powerful apparatus of the repressive regime. Right after the revolution, we saw people, and right now we still see people trying to question this position, this role, this apparatus of the security sector, what we call the police. It's not the military, but yet we cannot call them democratic. We cannot call them as having tried a genuine reform process. So in order for our transition to succeed, we absolutely need to tackle the issue of the security sector. And in Tunisia, when we talk about security sector, we talk about the police. We do not talk about the military, because the military has always been weak in this country.
Larbi Sadiki, I got the feeling you wanted to come in there. What were you going to say?
Just basically that security, and it's really a materialistic interpretation of events. The Tunisians, in the first instance, took to the streets because not only because of hunger, also because of freedom and dignity, and I guess really the ability to be able to have a voice, as you've said, before, and that's the upshot is that you've got a polyphonous polity at the moment. Society and polity are basically playing ball. They can talk to each other, but to really focus on materialistic dimensions of this, and of course security, which is an important concern, but it should not be the only concern. I think really it's like a misreading, of what's going on in Tunisia, and also, of course, this discourse is really part of an international agenda which tends, to focus too much on security, to the detriment of important issues like democratic reconstruction, freedoms, equality, etc., etc. I think really the big issue in Tunisia now is basically, to return trust, into, I guess, the ability of the polity that's been entrusted, through elections.
And does that include corruption? The one question we haven't really looked at so far is the question: has corruption been weeded out, or is that still there? Are the people who were corrupt before still in the positions they held before?
I think corruption really comes in many forms. It's not really going to be, you need basically a revolution, a real revolution. Of course, that's really why, I guess, really are these revolutions. You need lots of time to be able to weed out or to uproot corruption. I think really corruption is still there because remember, what we've had is a revolution at the apex of power. So really, basically, the Assad regimes have gone, but you've got a whole system there, the so-called deep state is still there, including business community, including the media, including curriculum, the arts, etc., etc. So it's not just about elections and constitutions, and that's really why the type of transition we should talk about, refigure and refashion in the Tunisian context, the Libyan context, the Egyptian context, should be more than just about elections, because you can have as many elections as you want, as we've seen in Egypt, and then that really leads to zilch. You go back to square one, and then what you have basically the return of the oppressive machinery. And Tunisia, as you've said, correctly before, was basically on the verge of going back, to that square. But thankfully, and I guess the Tunisians are lucky to have such remarkable people, dynamic people, who every now and then remind the politicians that we are here basically to prevent you, to keep you honest, to prevent you from monopolizing power. That's the key issue here in Tunisia. It doesn't matter, you can have a new prime minister, caretaker government, but basically those are the performative acts of politics. It does not really mean that you are really on the verge of a breakthrough. You get a breakthrough basically when you don't kill the revolution. And that's exactly what's been really attempted in lots of these, what I call the Arab Spring geography states, is to try through elections to kill revolution. I think revolution should be basically the public sphere space for civil society and society to be basically part and parcel of a transition.
Well, let me just throw one comparison into the mix. As we've just been discussing, the Arab Spring didn't totally purge the old regimes, the old ruling political, military and economic classes. So Arab Spring countries are not thought to have had a truly revolutionary moment, like the French Revolution, for example. That was caused in much the same way as the Arab Spring, by a failure of the state to meet the expectations of the people. From 1789 to 1792, France faced a rebellion that climaxed with the king being sent to the guillotine. But that wasn't the end of the story. France lived through a long, violent transformation. Monarchy was restored before people revolted once again in 1830. In fact, the idea of a modern republic was not really established until 1870. The point being, say many commentators, that we're seeing in the Middle East is the beginning of a long and unpredictable process. This chapter marks the end of a Middle East drawn up by imperial powers at the end of the First World War. Youssef Cherif, is that the point, really, that this is not going to happen overnight, that this is the start of a revolution in many countries, not just Tunisia, that could take a long time to evolve?
Totally, yes, or at least that's how it looks like. even though we have a backlash in Egypt, but as you can see, the situation in Egypt is not improving neither. So some people expected Egypt to get better once the revolution is over, or once the Muslim Brotherhood is reversed. But then what you get now is still a very bad situation. So Egypt might be heading towards another revolution if the cash is not there anymore. And in all the other Arab countries, you still have crises that are ongoing. And if we take as an example what happened in Tunisia, then we can expect other revolution or other uprisings to start soon in the other countries.
I think, Sue, if you allow me, in our political cultures, we've been historically and traditionally uncomfortable with fluidity. We like basically, to rush into structuring anything. So basically, we need like security, we need like the state, the parameters of the state, the structures of authority, etc., etc. I think really sometimes a little bit of chaos and disorder is great, because really you cannot have a revolution without some kind of chaos. It's basically that fluidity that gives the people the latitude to find themselves, to enact, that moment, of self-existence. That's exactly really what's happening. So really, I mean, I'm not really surprised by this. In fact, like, I welcome some of the chaos, even really in Egypt. Of course, what you've got now, you've got a polyphonous, situation. You've got the public squares. And when you go back, when you hark back, and I think in a very correct way, when you look at past revolutions like the French Revolution, remember the beginnings of that revolution was basically grounded in a philosophical, intellectual, I guess really moment. That's exactly what's missing. So really, ideally, where we are now, we should be basically building, or at least acquiring the building blocks of the intellect, the type of intellect, the type of curriculum thinking that can basically thrust people into, that moment of brilliance, of really real revolution, when really things start actually to move and to be shaken.
Okay, I'm just going to jump in there and bring in Amine Ghali back into the debate again. Are the revolutions as much about what people didn't want rather than what they do want? Was it really reaction to the dictatorships they were living underneath, rather than really looking forward to this is how we want to shape our country? And that is possibly almost the vacuum at the moment as to how that happens.
Well, I think that what triggers the revolution is something very particular. In Tunisia, this revolution has been triggered by the lack of opportunity. People did not go to the street in Sidi Bouzid or in Tela or in Gasrin because of lack of freedoms, or because of freedom of the press, or I don't know, gender equality or whatever. They went to the street because of lack of opportunity, and this lack of opportunity is a sum of several negative things. Among them, we can mention corruption, we can mention oppression, we can mention the deep state. But now that the regime at the top has been toppled, we are trying to establish a new order. We are seeing in some countries that went through a revolution going through chaos. Syria is an example. Libya is somehow an example, while Egypt and Tunisia, they tried somehow to build something out of this chaos, to move it away forward, or away toward, let's say, some form of institutional construction toward a democratic process. You also mentioned something about the French example, 200 years, or let's say 100 years between the revolution and the establishment of the Republic in 1870. Personally, I do not expect the Tunisian experience or the Arab experience to go through this long life cycle. I would expect it to go something close to the modern time cycles of transformation, which is what we saw in Latin America, what we saw in Eastern Europe or in Southeast Asia. We are talking about a cycle of, let's say, 5 or 10 years, where we can stand up and say, okay, what have we done in this transition process? Now in Tunisia, we are 3 years on. We are a little bit late compared to the first stage, which was supposed to be the constitution making, but it's not that bad, or it's not that kind of negative to the transition process. But still, I think we are counting we are measuring the transformation in terms of years, not in terms of decades or centuries or whatsoever.
Let's hope so. Sadly, gentlemen, we're out of time, but thank you. Very interesting debate that I'm sure we could carry on for hours. Amine Ghali in Tunis, Larbi Sadiki here in Doha, and Youssef Cherif also in Tunis. Thank you very much for joining me. And a reminder, you can find this programme and many more at facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can leave us your comments there, and why not? Like us too. I'm Sue Turton. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.